Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started in 3 minutes. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started in 2 minutes. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started in 1 minute. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. Hugh, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Navigating AI Challenges and Successes in Acquisition and Adoption. My name is Hugh Murphy, Senior Vice President at Leadership Connect, and I'm excited to kick off this important discussion on how AI is shaping the public sector. As you know, AI is rapidly transforming the way government agencies and organizations operate. But with that transformation comes both opportunities and challenges. So today we'll explore key considerations in AI adoption, procurement strategies, risk management, and real-world successes in integrating AI into the public sector operations. But before we dive in, just a few housekeeping notes for our audience. We have a NASBA representative attending to observe this webinar, and so that we can gain the ability to give out CPE credits. So if you would like to receive CPE credits, please listen to this outline about today's session. In terms of learning objectives, by the end of this session, we'll have a deeper understanding of AI acquisition challenges, risk mitigation strategies, and best practices for successful implementations. We'll be delivering this instruction via this webinar, and it's structured as a panel discussion with our industry experts, followed by an interactive Q&A session at the end. And CPE credit information, if you're here for continuing professional education credits, please note the following. The recommended credit and field of study for this webinar is up to 1 CPE in the information technology field of study. There's no prerequisites for this session, and this session is designated as a basic knowledge level session, and there's no advanced preparation required as well. To receive credit, please ensure you meet the attendance and participation requirements. And for this webinar, we'll ask 3 polling questions throughout the time here. And if you're interested in obtaining credit, please answer all 3 of those polling questions. This webinar is free to attend. If you have any concerns or feedback, please refer to our compliant resolution policy, which is on our website. And include the NASBA sponsor statement. So Leadership Connect is registered with the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, the NASBA, as a sponsor of continuing professional education on the National Registry of CPE sponsors. State boards of accountancy have final authority on the acceptance of individual courses for CPE credit. Complaints regarding registered sponsors may be submitted to the National Registry of CPE sponsors through its website, which is at www.nasbaregistry.org. So throughout this session, we encourage you all to ask questions, engage with our speakers, and share your insights throughout today's session. You'll see that there's a Q&A button within Zoom, as I'm sure many of you are familiar. So now with that, we can get started. I'd love to introduce our panelists, and it's my pleasure to welcome Sam Navarro, the Strategic Account Executive for Healthcare IT at Microsoft, Tushar Rathod, Product Mentor and Agile Coach and Adjunct Professor of Product Management at UMBC, and Dan Chenok, the Executive Director at IBM. So, gentlemen, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us today. I'd like to start off by giving you each the opportunity to introduce yourself further and share any other opening thoughts you want to use to kick off today's discussion. So, Sam, I see you here on my screen first. Do you want to kick us off today?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm delighted to be here. First, thank you very much, Leadership Connect, for the invitation. Thank you, Hugh, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Samuel Navarro. As Hugh alluded to, I'm the Strategic Account Executive for Health IT here at Microsoft. I previously had a 20-year stint in government where I did everything from large-scale acquisitions and general services administration to deploying tech on the front lines in the Department of Defense. So looking forward to definitely having a very interesting and good conversation around AI and how the market's moving and shaping and forming our everyday lives today with each and every one of you. Thanks, Hugh.
Thanks so much, Sam. Tushar, would you like to go next?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Very nice to meet you all and be here. My background is in tech and product management. For a number of years, I worked for tech companies, PayPal, Northrop, Xerox. Later on, I started my own consulting. So for the last 7-8 years, I've been working for myself. I love to teach. I teach at UMD, UMBC, Towson, couple online certification programs, travel around the world and do workshops and stuff. I just enjoy that. Over the last year, I built on my early passion that I had found during my time at PayPal, where we were using a lot of advanced ML for fraud detection and model building and all of that. And with the opportunity that AI presented last year, I started partnering up with UMBC, and we set up the Center for Applied AI. And I'm very passionate about the good that AI can do. Glad to be here.
Thanks so much, Tushar. Great to have you again. And Dan, not last but certainly not least, do you want to say a few words?
Thanks, Hugh. It's great to be here with such a terrific panel and with the group here assembled on the webinar. I'm honored to be here. I'm especially honored from a personal level because my father was actually worked with NASPA for many years when he was the president of the AICPA, which he did for 15 years in the late 20th century, actually. So I currently run a think tank inside IBM called the IBM Center for the Business of Government. We are a sort of a research team that works on issues of interest to government leaders, and we work with academic experts and nonprofit partners to produce the research and the reports that we write. We have a research agenda that covers a wide variety of issues facing government leaders, and AI is at the center of that. We've written about 10 papers, and probably in the last 6 or 7 years, on AI in government. We just put out our last paper on this just last week on the use of AI to reduce improper payments, fraud, waste, and abuse. Timely topic in government, and we'll continue to do so. So happy to engage. I should also note that I was in the government for many years, primarily the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, where I had the portfolio of the technology policy and budget responsibility, which is the portfolio that's now handled by the Federal Chief Information Officer. When I ran the office, it had a different title, and it wasn't quite as high up in the hierarchy.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dan. No, that's great. And as you said, some very timely topics to discuss as we go into this today. I thought we could start off just maybe a little bit broader and then kind of working our way in. So just thinking about some general AI adoption and strategies. What are some of the biggest challenges agencies are facing when acquiring and adopting AI solutions today? I guess maybe Sam, if you want to start us off.
Sure. Well, I think taking it from the use cases that we saw in industry and then transitioning that to a specific mission within government was the biggest challenge, and then scoping that into what we call a contract, right? And depending on how you scope that contract, whether it's cost plus, firm fixed price, would impact your ability to see quick adoption on the acquisition side. We're not even talking about application side. And one of the reasons I'm delighted to see Dan here is because, quite frankly, IBM was kind of first to market, right? Remember, Dan, the Watson days, right? And boy, did I was in government during those days, right? When we were trying to figure out how do we apply Watson to daily use cases here in government that can help us drive efficiencies and effectiveness for everyday citizens. And one of my stints prior to coming to Microsoft was at the Centers of Excellence in GSA. Post-pandemic, we were deploying what we called the Data Modernization Initiative, and it was really intaking a lot of data, right? And how do we analyze that data in a way that doesn't require a lot of human kind of engagement, right, to kind of count beans and things of that nature, right, and bring red flags to humans so we could do a lot more of the intellectual work. And our biggest challenge was, as you stated, Hugh, was to take what we saw in the market at that time, which ChatGPT was huge with OpenAI, and then incorporating that into our approach. And what I could say is that I think as we've started to mature in what this concept of AI is the conversation has gone from focusing on a large language model to focusing on a capability, where the large language model is just part of a solution that you're bringing into the enterprise, right? And what we do from an acquisition perspective is we tee up the capability, and then we compare that capability to what is being proposed in industry to what we're proposing to government. And what we've seen is hand in hand, that works very much kind of, it tees it up for then the cybersecurity and the compliance piece to understand precisely what's the scope of what we are trying to get onto production, right? A lot faster. And it's worked very well from a pricing perspective, comparison perspective, to just figure out what the capability is, what is the platform we're buying into, and then harness that to drive business outcomes. where I think initially we were looking at just the large language model in and of itself, where that's really just the engine, but you're kind of missing the rest of the vehicle, right? The wheels and the frame and everything else. So I think we've learned a lot. We've come a long way to say, what is the capability we're trying to deliver? Let's look at that holistically with the LLM built in, and then let's drive that towards an acquisition or a cybersecurity compliance mechanism to bring to production.
Great, thanks, Sam. Dan, you want to,
Sure. So yeah,
dig
I'd
in
build
there?
on what Sam talked about. You know, a lot of people, not just in government, but all over, are saying, "Oh, we can apply AI to anything, and that's going to solve the problem." It's really important to think about what's the use case that we're looking at on, you know, in government on behalf of the taxpayer, and is AI the best technology to use to provide that solution? And you know, it could be that if you're automating some common processes, you could buy something that's, you know, simpler in the technology world. Robotics process automation would work just fine without a lot of AI on it. Or it could be that some analytics tool that, you know, may not have AI built in, but may be able to kind of look across data sets to help an analyst with decision making. That may be sufficient. It really depends on the use case that you're looking to support. The other two challenges, I think, that I'd point out among multiple are budgets. You know, I'm from OMB, and the federal budget process works as, and for those of you that are familiar with it, it's a 3-year cycle. So in year one, you come up with the idea. In year two, the administration asks Congress for money for the idea. And in year three, usually later in year three, because there's a continuing resolution like there is now, you actually get the money for the thing you thought of 2 years ago. So, you know, working with AI, you need to operate at a much faster speed to be able to apply AI to a problem. And so you see government kind of struggling a bit with how to live in that world and how to apply and promote innovation in that world as well. And then finally, I'd say that, you know, a lot of agencies are working with technology that's years, sometimes decades in the past, especially at the platform or infrastructure level. And you got to be really careful about, if you introduce an AI application to your existing platform, there could be a problem with how that fits into the platform in terms of the technology that could actually cause the platform to sub-optimize, a friendly term, and that could lead to problems. So you need to think about introducing AI kind of workload by workload. Like, here, let's apply this AI to this particular part of the platform, and then let's build from there, rather than like turn over the entire ball of wax in one fell swoop.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think you just might have made this webinar go another 2 hours just to cover some of those challenges, but I appreciate your feedback. And Tushar, anything to add?
Well, these fine panelists stole my thunder. So just to emphasize a couple things that they already picked on. Budget, definitely a big challenge. Procurement vehicles and how procurement processes work. I think we need to rethink that whole thing. The timelines are unrealistic. A couple of things that stood out. I was reading a report published of all the AI use cases in 2024. And there is some kind of hesitation or lack of operationalization of those use cases. There were I want to say 1,400, 1,500 use cases across multiple different agencies that POCs were done for. And as we look deeper, we realize that it is because of a combination of factors, partly because of lack of data readiness, quality data available, robust data in the right platforms, right formats, skills, tools and technology, and in general, a lack of maturity all in all, and not just from government, but also from industry in terms of how to operationalize some of these pieces. So I think a lot of that is evolving rapidly, and I think we'll see a lot of progress in the next few months.
Great. And so you all kind of touched on this a little bit, like in terms of, you know, how can agencies, you know, assess AI as maybe the right solution, or how prepared they are as an agency to maybe even adopt AI as a solution? Anyone want to kind of expand on that? What agencies might be able to do to kind of gauge their readiness for an AI solution, or that it is the right solution? Anyone, I guess.
So I guess the question is, how do you figure out like if this is the right solution, right?
Right.
And a little bit of that is a chicken and an egg, right? So sometimes when you don't do the pre-work, it becomes a solution waiting for a problem, which is not where you want to be, right? You want to really understand, and there are so many basic things that we need to truly and clearly understand about AI. AI is, I think Daniel was talking about it. AI is not the answer to everything, right? We should not like just say, let's use AI and it'll solve all our problems, right? It doesn't work that way. The core thing, for example, is AI is, at least generative AI, is probabilistic, not deterministic. So what does that mean? It means that if you're going to use it for deterministic rule-based scenarios where you have exact clarity and those steps need to be followed in a certain way, Gen AI may not be the best tool. Can it do it? Very likely it will, right? Because of all the advancements. But it may be one or two things. One is there is a continuing problem of hallucination, which is getting better, but it is not quite there. And then secondly, it is also like using a bulldozer for gardening, right? So you really don't need that, right? So so really assessing those different pieces to say, what is the problem that I'm solving, and is AI really needed here? And if yes, where do I bring it in? How do I bring it in? Is the next question. Right? So I would approach it in that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me
And
let me
Dan,
give.
I was going to say, Dan, you just kind of touched on this
I'll
too.
try to give like an example of, AI as a use case and AI not. Like if you've got a complex set of benefits and you're trying to, an individual is receiving across multiple federal agencies, maybe state and local programs as well, and you're a caseworker and you're trying to help that person, sort of understand looking across all these rule sets with different pieces. Gen AI may be a very good tool because it can, very quickly bring together a lot of information that you'd have to otherwise, spend weeks and weeks gathering as a caseworker to try to help that person deal with their life as it's changing kind of day to day. On the other hand, if you are a government person trying to sort of look at accelerating, common processes or patterns in data. And you're really kind of looking at, all right, we've got 17 steps that we're taking, and they're relatively homogenized, but they're separated in the process, like, gather the data, cleanse the data, analyze the data, share the data with your staff, have a meeting to determine what to do about it. And there's kind of steps in each step. You can accelerate that through like a more basic data tool like RPA, and come out with something that will shorten the process so that when it gets time to make the complex decision and then you apply a Gen AI approach, at that point you're applying it for what it's best used for, which is looking across complicated data. As Tushar mentioned, you don't need, I'll use this for my neighbor who I think has a bulldozer in his yard. You don't need the bulldozer, to clean up the garden. I think it's a really good analogy. A former IBM colleague used to say AI isn't like peanut butter. You spread it over everything and it tastes better.
And to caveat on that point, I think, as a shameless plug, on Microsoft, we kind of pride ourselves in bringing AI to the fingertips of every user. But as Dan alluded, or stated before, in terms of AI as a platform, we like to strongly delineate between individual use cases of AI and an enterprise use case of AI. And I 100% agree with Dan and Tushar here. Sometimes we could be building a solution in search of a problem, or we built a solution that works very well for a specific problem, but not necessarily for every problem. And so assessing workload by workload to see if you have the right tool to address that specific challenge is part of the key. You know, when I, for example, leverage Copilot, I have small agents that work very well for my personal use case, from looking at my email to pulling content from my OneDrive and putting a summary document together for my executives, etc. But those use cases may not apply within that same framework at scale, right? One of the agencies we helped, for example, was looking for an AI solution to do FOIA requests, for example, right, and redact information at scale. And so a tool like a small agent that can do a single FOIA request and redact some information and get some guidance from me in doing that within my own computer probably isn't the best tool to deploy across the enterprise. And so we looked at that as an example of, hey, you know, you do need to address this workload by workload and see what capabilities fit best. But definitely, I agree, putting the requirement up front and then finding the best tool in your toolbox if you have it, right? But always not being afraid of going back to the drawing board, right? If you do need to build something that's more fit for purpose, it is key as well.
Great. Thanks, Sam. I think we're going to go to our first poll question here now to get some feedback from the audience. So for the audience, what is the biggest challenge your agency or organization's facing adopting AI? And I guess while we wait for some of those results to come back in, I think what all are saying in many ways is it's really important to understand, what the agency's mission is and like the ultimate goals to assess what solutions might be the best fit, whether it's AI or not. And are there other things when you're thinking about maybe even the vendor or provider of the solution? Are there things you need to consider when trying to select, which of maybe several options if you do determine, that AI is the right fit?
So you always want to I'll put on my hat that I share with Sam, the sort of procurement in the procurement world. You want to make sure that you are looking at the sustainability of the solution that you're presenting. So there are things that make AI work better, like a good cyber platform around the AI, because if somebody breaks into the application, that's going to be not good. That you want to look for a solution where they have a strong data management policy, so that you're making sure that the data that goes into an AI model, that the company is sort of looking across and looking at making sure that the data reflects the state of the world that the AI application is trying to make decisions on. To the extent you're dealing with personal information, and many government agencies do, you want to make sure that whatever company has sort of a strong ethics program in terms of privacy protection, transparency, explainability. There are best practices. IBM, many other companies have things like AI ethics boards. Or similar governance bodies. So you want to kind of look at, does the company have a program to make sure that it can minimize risk in addition to perform well in AI? The last thing I'll point out here, actually, the government of Canada a number of years ago put together basically a BPA, a blanket purchase agreement, for companies that it works with in the AI space. And it had them all go through a series of basically tests around these kinds of factors. What's your AI security strategy? What's your ethics profile? How do you protect information, et cetera? And those companies that passed that then qualified to do work with the government, because the government could basically put a seal of approval, if you will, on their good practice for individual agencies to work with. So there are various ways to implement that.
Thanks very much, Dan. You can see the poll results. Not too surprising. There's a very broad kind of scattering of some of the biggest challenges, data security and privacy concerns, and lack of technical expertise and workforce readiness being the top two. But you can see there's a good mix across the board. And I think we can talk a little bit more about some of these items as well. We did start to talk a little bit about some of the procurement challenges and acquisition challenges as it relates to AI. Dan, you'd mentioned sort of the 3-year cycle being a little bit of an issue when it comes to a technology that is evolving by the minute. I guess what you mentioned is BPA. Is there any, maybe we can just kind of continue with you. Like, is there anything you mentioned that we can do maybe to reform some of the process and streamline it a bit that could make these procurements a little easier for agencies?
So I'll start, and then happy to hear what Sam and Tushar have to say. Part of the speed at which government can act is the speed of capital, if you will. So get back to the budget process that I mentioned, and you just mentioned in the question. There are ways to sort of pathways for agencies to act more quickly and respond to the need for introducing AI into a process, like working capital funds, where the funds kind of are there and they can use it more of an not quite on demand, but more of an as needed basis. There's the Technology Modernization Fund at the federal level, which provides for a way to provide central funding for innovative solutions across agencies. And then once those are made, hopefully the agencies can use some sort of more agile procurement models, which GSA has done some work around, to allow agencies to kind of understand what capabilities are out there, and then potentially work with a number of companies in sort of a proof of concept phase. And then, as they're developing this proof of concept, there may be interesting things the agency knows about it. It may actually come up with an innovative procurement kind of joint venture situation where two companies may have different capabilities that the agency can bring forward. Whereas in a traditional kind of long tail procurement, they would have chosen one company that may be better at some things and not as good at others, and the agency would never tease that out without a sort of agile approach. So, from a budgeting perspective and a procurement perspective, there are things the government can do to be more flexible.
Yeah, and to caveat on Dan's point, since I was a part of that world in GSA 10 months ago, the value proposition of AI is highly tied to the value proposition of the cloud. Full transparency for everyone. I used to work in a data center. That was my first job in government. I was a GS9 system administrator in the middle of Bavaria for the Department of the Army. And then our first federal CIO said, guess what? We're moving all of this to the cloud, right? And the value proposition was pretty straightforward, right? We kind of mitigate the risk of managing these data centers ourselves to industry that does it a lot better and more innovatively. But somehow between that transition, we still buy cloud sometimes, like we bought our own systems on a CapEx model, right? Where we buy more infrastructure than platform or software. And now the value proposition has moved not only from buying cloud in a more innovative way, flexible way, but then as you move to the cloud, you get access to the tools that we're talking about, right? The artificial intelligence capabilities that can make a lot of the things that you're putting in the cloud more robust. So when I was in GSA, a lot of the issues and challenges that we talked about in that last survey, we were trying to address as quickly as we could. First, the technical expertise challenge is real, not only from a technical perspective, but from an acquisition perspective, right? And how can you leverage best business practices that have already been learned from one agency to another? I'd refer a lot of folks to go to the IT vendor management office in GSA, where they've helped the IT technology center build innovative BPAs, like you said, Hugh, like the BPA called Ascend, which is the latest one that they're working on deploying, where they figured out that some of these policies don't help us, right? How can you buy cloud on a bona fide need policy where it says, I need to buy a block of cloud now, when it's more like a utility, right? I may use more processing and storage today than I use the next month, et cetera. Well, they've addressed that with some of the policies that they got through the senior procurement executive that was there when I was there, by allowing folks to create CLINs or contract line item numbers. I'm getting very technical now, with sub-CLINs that are unpriced, right? And you fill them in as you go, right? As you buy and consume the capability. And so tying AI to that, it's kind of in the same nature, right? If you're buying AI in a very traditional fashion, incorporating it into a procurement is a lot harder because now you're pricing it separately than the infrastructure you're buying versus a platform or a software. So that's one. Technical expertise. I would recommend, kind of one of the things that we understand with government is our capital is not in necessarily being efficient, even though we want to be, right? Or generating revenue, right? Because we leverage the tax dollars of the taxpayers to do our work, but it's in maintaining the public trust, which means that more often than not, agencies are going to be more risk adverse to deploying AI technology that's more cutting edge, right? My former CIO said we want to be leading edge, not bleeding edge, right? Which means that a lot of the solutions that agencies can buy could be shovel-ready capabilities, right, that are already embedded in the platform you're buying. I'll give you an example. We have a tool within Microsoft called Information Assistant. So if you want to have the ability to curate information from a system of record, and you want to make sure that you're not training someone else's model or using an open source solution, Information Assistant is something you can deploy internal to your own enclave. You can drop in it everything from PDFs to Excels to any kind of document, and it will go into those documents and curate information for somebody who's asking it questions, right? That's a more cost-efficient and effective way to deploy a chatbot kind of capability where you don't have to necessarily leverage as much subject matter expertise as a Microsoft or an IBM would have to do to create something more, how can I say it, more custom to your need. And there's a lot of tools. That's just one example out of many tools that are already kind of shovel ready and already baked, so to speak, for a use case that I would recommend for folks to do the market research, right? To find those and buy into those before thinking about custom capabilities that are more time consuming and more costly than something that's already built.
Thanks, Ed. Tushar, anything to add in?
So, well, Dan and Sam covered a lot. I'll emphasize two quick things. One is procurement should not be based on FOMO, which is fear of missing out, right? It's not about, hey, I'm here and I'm cool too, and I do AI as well. And you'd be surprised how many people think that way, right? Another very, very interesting article I read a couple of weeks ago, and the gist of it was, it is not too late to do AI. Don't feel like you have to, and you have to do it right now or else, right? Everyone else is doing it, and I'm not doing it, and I must be behind, right? Especially when it comes to an enterprise level implementation, a thoughtful approach will go much farther and stay and give you a much higher ROI than something done in a hurry. The second quick thing I'll emphasize is that organizational readiness for AI is critical. It should not be underestimated. And I would emphasize two things, the structural readiness and the cultural readiness. In terms of the structure, if the organization is too siloed, oh, only my area, only this my data, my access, my people, that mindset needs to be relaxed. That needs to go away. We need to start thinking big picture. We need to start thinking, end-to-end pieces, right? That's when you can take true advantage of what AI can truly offer, right? From a cultural standpoint, instead of being risk averse, I wouldn't say take crazy risks, but be open, be open to trying things, and it's okay to fail and all of those things. I mean, just start trying different things to figure out what really works, what works for you, because there are a number of different case studies, and still it's very early days in the overall AI journey. Figure out what works for you, and the best way to do it is to try it, to use it. And I would say start small, start with a very simple use case that can then be scaled across the enterprise. If you look at ITSM, IT services, what is the number one problem even today is password reset. How many calls come into help desk? Oh, my password, it's out and this and that, right? Just basic things like that. Why can't we use AI for something like that? That is a really well-known, documented use case, may require a little bit of research, authentication, all of those things to be figured out. And you can have an agent work end to end, and this should almost go away, right? The beauty of a simple use case like that is the simplicity offers the ability to scale. And once you create that scalability, that becomes somewhat of a template, becomes a great story to tell. It's something that people can rally behind. It's something that people can relate to. It creates that buy-in and a positive momentum. And based on that, you can then start scaling other use cases. I would encourage a similar line of thinking as we think about enterprise grade implementations.
Hey, Hugh, one other resource, and can I put a link in the chat so that people can see it? Is that something I'm able to do?
Yeah, you can put it in, and then I think you could maybe for them to see right away the QA, but then we'll be sending out a follow-up to all this
Okay.
that we
I'll
can
put it. Well, I'll put it in both. We wrote a paper a couple of years ago called "AI for Government: A Maturity Model," or a title close to that. And so it basically gives agencies a framework to help answer the question that we just talked about for the last few minutes. Like, where are you now in your technology journey? Where do you want to go, and how do you kind of insert AI into applications as you're moving, depending on how mature your infrastructure, your data strategy, your service layers, your service strategy, et cetera, is. And I'll put a link to that in the chat.
Great. Thanks, Dan. I guess along this topic, and maybe while we're getting into this, I can kind of do another following poll question right now on kind of asking sort of what stage organizations currently in regarding AI modernization. So we can talk a little bit more about this, but I guess before we move on from like kind of the procurement piece, I know a couple of you, Sam and a couple others, when we were doing our call prior, mentioned the role of public-private partnerships. Anything further to discuss there?
So if I could jump in, I would add universities or academia to that public-private partnership. Having been associated with a number of educational institutions, I'll tell you that there is a lot of knowledge, expertise available in the academia. The industry takes risks, it develops cutting-edge products, implements them. Academia does a lot of research that helps the industry develop or even seed some of these innovations. Government is usually by design not supposed to or expected to do the cutting-edge pieces, but supposed to be a fast follower. And this sort of creates a very good positive ecosystem almost, where all three could benefit from each other. So universities, instead of thinking about it just from pure innovation and research standpoint, would start thinking about the applications of that technology and think of it in the context of a problem, which is what we're trying to do at the UMBC's Center for Applied AI, applied being the key word. The industry, can provide funding, can provide focus, can provide the partnership, and the government can benefit tremendously from both the industry and the academia. So I think I would reshape this to be a public-private academia partnership, and encourage that.
Yeah, and I would caveat what Tushar just said by saying this: in times of austerity like we're seeing today, it's very important for agencies to build what I call your second team. And what's your second team? It's your ability to reach into a group of experts and get an unbiased opinion on how to move forward with the capability or solution you're thinking of, right? I think Tushar said it spot on when he said AI is not the answer to everything, right? Sometimes it may be a RPA tool that you can leverage to achieve your objective, or another tool that's more simple and straightforward and more cost efficient. And I think public-private partnerships is that space you go when you want to get an unbiased opinion, where you could have a Microsoft at the table. And obviously, if you come speak to Microsoft only, you'll get the Microsoft spin, right? Or if you go to one of our competitors, you'll get their spin, but where you could have all of us at the table together and unobjectively provide an unobjective answer, right, to a problem set that an agency may be having. And then also, just to kind of give a plug to Shar, right? I think academia is one of the best areas to go to have that public-private partnership, where you could get an unbiased opinion as well. So I'm a University of Maryland alum, so I'll give a shout out to the Terps, of course, but definitely academia is an area where you can get access to a lot of smart folks. I saw in our poll, technical expertise is at a premium. And let's face it, it's very hard to compete for technical expertise when you're limited to the general schedule for compensation, right? Hey, we're all in the market in the private sector as well for talent as well. So public-private partnerships is definitely an area where you can build an extension to your agency and really delve into some of these very difficult challenges when it comes to modernizing and technology. And hopefully, I think for every agency, it should be a zero-cost investment other than just your time, right? To get some pretty good ideas and thoughts on how to tackle some of your more challenging issues.
Let me echo the point about academia. So piling on with Tushar, our whole model of our center is research is academic expertise coming in to help government. The paper I mentioned that came out last week was written by two academics, one from West Virginia University and one from Georgia State. And you'll find last year we did another paper on AI and tax modernization. We work with the American University. They have a tax policy center, and they were the partners. So I think that there's really rich opportunities there. The other thing I'd say is there's a bit of a front end, back end opportunity that doesn't always get disentangled. So government still does a lot of the basic research that led to the internet or led to a lot of semiconductor chip production, and that hopefully still goes on. Government's role in supporting basic research that doesn't have sort of commercial viability in the near term, but is necessary and critical for commercial competitiveness in the long term. That's something where a public-private partnership is really important, so that the companies who are doing research, Microsoft, IBM, others, can work with like the national labs and help identify uses that go forward, and we in industry that benefits the country, and it benefits our companies as well. And then at the back end, back to where Sam was going, you have a lot of opportunities for government to do a better job working in partnership with industry to kick the tires. As I mentioned before, the procurement system isn't really friendly to many players in the sandbox, and then you down select. Traditional procurements at least aren't. And going to that, and you can imagine a budget system that kind of is friendly to that by having what in industry you'd call flexible capital that tolerates experimentation up front, where there's a sort of a lower risk or higher risk, higher return kind of strategy. And then you have more patient capital at the operations and maintenance level, which might be those longer term contracts. So I think there's various ways that the partnership can be implemented, both through procurement and through other means.
Great, thanks. Thank you all. And maybe if it's okay, I'll take one of these questions that came in through the chat as it relates to academia. One of our audience members asked about using AI in that research development, and what are some of the key areas to be mindful of when you're incorporating AI into the writing the data into these research projects. Are there any key factors when considering AI as part of these research projects?
Yeah, so I think the field and space of research has become extremely exciting in the last 1 month with the release of research assistants and the advanced research assistants released by Google. And it was in the news, I think yesterday, that ChatGPT, or OpenAI, I should say, is launching those high-end research assistants for what, $20,000 a month or something like that, right? And that is really, really cool. It is going to really turbocharge the whole research field. Now, the real definition or the driver of research is no longer your ability to sift through papers, consume words, and really remember things and all of those things that used to take us so long and years and numbers of large teams and all that, right? Now, these larger advanced models can cut down on that time to give you the time and space to really think creative, to ask the right questions, and to create these permutations and combinations that were previously either not possible humanly or just took too long or just took too much work. And suddenly now you can do a lot of that with the newer tech, right? It does not take the researchers or the research teams out. It changes the way they work with these technologies. It is, and we saw that in the award of recent Nobel Prize this year as well, right? The Nobel Prize for chemistry, for example, went to AI researchers, and that created a stir. But the advancement in that field was because of AI, and there is a lot of potential to do more and more of that. Also, if you're concerned about your data safety, access, those kinds of things, a lot of that has been fairly resolved, or can be addressed properly. There are open source tools, may not be as great, but really good. There are access issues, controls issues in place. Maybe Sam can talk a little more about how Microsoft is addressing some of those challenges with Copilots and other products that that provide the privacy and access control and make sure that there is safety built in, and there are all these overlays that protect enterprise policies and all of those things, right? So all of those things can be taken care of and they can be addressed, but in my mind, the whole field of research is going to accelerate. I mean, we are talking about the potential of solving cancers that we didn't think we would be able to solve in our lifetime, and it might just happen. So.
Great, thanks, Tushar. And yeah, and I think we definitely want to spend a little time towards the end here talking about some of the, the compliance and security concerns. I think we're going to have one more polling question for the audience. I think just to give it, we didn't really touch on it, but on the last question was about sort of where your organization is currently in regards to AI adoption, and I think the consensus was, many are very much in the earlier stages, so just starting to explore where they can implement AI, followed by running some smaller AI pilot projects, sort of what you had referred to earlier, Tushar, and then less or so on deploying AI on a broader scale or even across multiple departments. It's really looks like it's more on those pilot projects and just kind of starting the process. So interesting to see where different agencies stand there. But yeah, I guess the question here for question number 3 is out on which AI adoptions do you think will have the greatest impact on government operations in the next 5 years? So we'll wait to see what some of those results are, but maybe while we can kind of get into some of the security and compliance issues. How can agencies ensure AI solutions comply with federal privacy, security, and ethical guidelines? Sam, you want to take that one first?
Sure, and a lot of work's been done around this topic, and everyone can look up AI 600-1, a NIST special publication that was released to talk a little bit about guiding principles, responsible AI, how to make sure that you deploy AI in a safe and secure manner. And I'm going to use kind of a legacy terminology, but one that I think applies the same is to consider a defense in depth approach of making sure that you have the proper risk mitigation framework in place for data that's at rest, where you store the data in transit, how it traverses the network, and then now we have to factor in data in compute. So how does the LLM operate? In which environment does it operate? That's why for us, it's been very important to provide agencies access to large language models that don't communicate open source or out to the public web, right? Our guiding principle at Microsoft is your data, right? So your data and the way you use your large language models in your network is not training our model, but it's training an LLM inside of your enclave. And so, we got to kind of, I think, follow the basics. I think we're more and more leaning towards a world where zero trust is being implemented in a way that's also safeguarding the information that is passing through a lot of these large language models. But, I think that quantum is going to really stress test, right, a lot of the security postures across the government. And I think that hopefully we're being mindful of that in a way that we're deploying AI and capabilities in a way that's getting us also quantum ready, so to speak, right? To make sure that we're skating, as Wayne Gretzky said, to where the puck is going, not to where the puck is today.
Absolutely. Dan?
We're about to use Alex Ovechkin because he's about to pass Wayne Gretzky as the all-time NHL scorer. I'd say that the post-quantum cryptography is something that I agree is an emerging field, and AI is going to help a lot in thinking about how do we stay ahead of threats in a world, where you're going to have quantum-based adversaries as well as governments using these technologies. Sort of stepping back to how do you build in and address privacy and information management? I think that establishing an AI governance program is critical for any organization, especially a government organization. So one where you kind of make sure that it's not just the developers who are working on the problem. You have a general counsel representative. You have program officials. You have the CIO who's thinking about IT management overall. So you've got an integrated team as a governance frame, kind of bringing in and looking at strategies for how do you build in the cybersecurity protections that we just talked about ex ante, as opposed to waiting for somebody to hack in. How do you think about setting up data management protocols so you can, to the extent possible, de-identify information? Because a lot of adversaries, once they break into a system, can use AI to pretty quickly do a privacy matching algorithm or personnel matching algorithm and violate privacy protections that otherwise might be there. So thinking about setting up those kinds of monitoring and checkpoints so you can respond quickly. It's really important for industry to share information. There's a number of different information sharing networks that our two companies belong to, so that we understand sort of what's the threat and how can we help government stay ahead of that threat. And so, there are often discussions around that. So, it's definitely a team sport, and it's something that government ought to ask itself and ask industry, make sure that you've got a responsible governance process going forward.
Thanks so much, Dan. Really important. And I guess looking at some of the results here, our last question about areas of AI adoption over the next 5 years or so. The majority, about half of the audience, said AI-powered automation and efficiency improvements, followed by advanced data analytics and decision-making tools. I think talked about the decision-making tools. A few, we've touched on a little bit about having that multiple LLM model and building out a solution to address those. And then third was strengthening cybersecurity, which we just talked there about a little bit as well. So I can't believe we're already at the bottom of the hour, top of the hour here. We have about 4 minutes. And we did get a few questions came in from the audience. If you all have another few minutes, maybe we can just take one or two of those and then wrap things up.
Yeah.
One question was asked earlier, sort of when we were talking a little bit more about the procurement process, was regarding FedRAMP and how does FedRAMP come into play in terms of purchasing AI platforms. Anyone want to take that one?
So I'll offer a maybe outsider kind of perspective to FedRAMP. I was involved with FedRAMP and building a compliance tool, compliance automation service, and you know, an in-house compliance as a service, kind of a set of automation checks and all that. My 2 cents would be that FedRAMP needs to be re-envisioned in the age of AI. I think it's time to go back to the drawing board. I think it's time to go back to the core principles of why we needed FedRAMP and to think about what FedRAMP really means in the AI age. It is no longer a one-time thing. It is a continuous step-by-step assessment at multiple different levels. There needs to be continuous remediation. The FedRAMP itself should be a highly intelligent technology platform and not a bunch of forms and people evaluating those things, right? We need to simply rethink this, like what does FedRAMP mean and how do we actually implement and operationalize it to rapidly adopt technologies in a safe way and evaluate them on a continuous basis.
Tushar, coming from GSA, I just have to say ditto. 100% couldn't agree more with what you just said.
Yeah, I say hallelujah to both. And I will point out, I was just on a commission at the Center for Strategic and International Studies that was a secure cloud commission, but there were a lot of references to AI in our work. It's a recent report from CSIS that's co-chaired by Karen Evans and Rob Kanaki. And there were a series of FedRAMP proposals in there that I think would be very apropos to this in terms of continuous monitoring, enabling industry to, get in front of FedRAMP certifications, making it more market oriented. So I refer folks to look at the CSIS.org website, and you'll see that as one of the most recent reports.
Well, with that, I want to thank you all again for joining. This has been a really interesting and thoughtful discussion around AI, and I think hopefully the audience has been able to take away a lot of great insights and ideas from it. I want to thank you all again, Dan, Sam, Tushar, really appreciate it. And from everyone here at Leadership Connect, I want to thank you all for joining this afternoon. I hope you found it as interesting as I did, and we look forward to speaking to everyone soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.